Question 1. Research into the regulatory landscape of Ontario's financial services sector reveals a strong emphasis on client protection. A financial advisor in Toronto is approached by a long-standing client who expresses excitement about a new, high-risk technology fund that has recently launched. The client has a moderate risk tolerance and a conservative investment objective focused on capital preservation. The advisor believes the fund has significant growth potential, but is aware of its speculative nature and the potential for substantial losses. Considering the advisor's obligations under Ontario securities law and ethical guidelines, which approach best balances client interests with regulatory compliance. Option A. Advise the client to invest in the fund, emphasizing the higher commission the advisor would receive, as this incentivizes the advisor to provide better service. Option B. Suggest the fund based on the advisor's personal conviction about its future success, assuming the client will benefit from the advisor's expertise. Option C. Recommend the fund enthusiastically, highlighting its potential for high returns, and downplay the associated risks to capitalize on the client's excitement. Option D. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment, explaining the fund's risks and potential rewards in detail, and only recommend it if it demonstrably aligns with the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, even if it means advising against it. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment, explaining the fund's risks and potential rewards in detail, and only recommend it if it demonstrably aligns with the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, even if it means advising against it. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the stringent regulatory requirements governing financial advice in Ontario. The advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC rules, and the ethical obligations of a registered professional. Misinterpreting or ignoring these obligations can lead to significant regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and harm to the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, followed by a recommendation that is demonstrably in the client's best interest and compliant with Ontario regulations. This approach prioritizes the client's welfare and aligns with the fiduciary duty expected of financial advisors. Specifically, under Ontario securities law, advisors have a duty to act honestly, in good faith, and in the best interests of their clients. This includes ensuring that any recommended investment is suitable for the client, considering their financial circumstances, investment knowledge, and risk tolerance. The advisor must also be able to articulate how the recommendation meets these criteria, which is a core requirement of the OSC's client-focused reforms. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a product solely because it is new and exciting, without a proper suitability assessment, violates the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and comply with OSC regulations. This approach prioritizes novelty over client welfare and regulatory compliance. Suggesting a product based on the advisor's personal belief in its future success, without considering the client's specific circumstances, is also a failure. This demonstrates a lack of objectivity and a potential conflict of interest, as the advisor's personal conviction is overriding the client's needs. Recommending a product that offers a higher commission to the advisor without adequately considering its suitability for the client constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and potentially regulatory rules regarding conflicts of interest and best interest duties. This prioritizes the advisor's financial gain over the client's financial well-being. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must fully understand the client's profile and objectives. Second, they should identify potential investment solutions that align with this profile. Third, they must rigorously assess each solution against regulatory requirements and ethical standards, particularly the best interest duty. Finally, they should document their recommendation and the rationale behind it, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 2. Which approach would be most aligned with the regulatory framework and ethical obligations for a financial advisor operating under the Ontario Securities Commission OSC, when a client expresses a strong desire for rapid wealth accumulation through high-risk investments? Option A. Conduct a detailed suitability assessment, including the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and time horizon, and recommend investments that are demonstrably suitable based on this comprehensive evaluation, ensuring thorough documentation. Option B. Recommend a high-risk, speculative investment immediately, as the client has explicitly stated their desire for quick profits to satisfy their immediate request. Option C. Prioritize recommending investment products that offer the highest commission potential, as this aligns with the advisor's business goals and can be framed as a benefit to the client through increased service capacity. Option D. Suggest a complex and illiquid investment that has historically shown high returns, without fully explaining the associated risks to a client who has limited investment experience. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed suitability assessment, including the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and time horizon, and recommend investments that are demonstrably suitable based on this comprehensive evaluation, ensuring thorough documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the stringent regulatory requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC). A financial advisor must act in the client's best interest while adhering to rules designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations can lead to severe penalties, including fines, license suspension, and reputational damage. The advisor must demonstrate a thorough understanding of the OSC's suitability requirements and the ethical obligations associated with providing financial advice. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and time horizon, followed by recommending investments that are demonstrably suitable based on this assessment. This aligns directly with OSC Rule 31-103 registration requirements, exemptions, and ongoing registrant obligation, which mandates that registrants must have a reasonable basis to believe that a recommendation is suitable for the client. This includes understanding the client's financial circumstances, investment knowledge, and risk profile. The advisor must document this assessment and the rationale for each recommendation, ensuring transparency and accountability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a high-risk, speculative investment solely because the client expressed a desire for quick profits, without a thorough assessment of their risk tolerance or financial capacity to absorb potential losses, violates the OSC's suitability obligations. This approach prioritizes the client's immediate, potentially ill-informed, desire over their long-term financial well-being and regulatory compliance. Suggesting an investment that is overly complex or illiquid for a client with limited investment experience or a need for readily accessible funds, without adequately explaining the risks and implications, also fails to meet the suitability standard. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the client's capacity to manage the investment. Focusing primarily on the potential commission generated by a particular product, rather than its suitability for the client, represents a conflict of interest and a breach of ethical duties. The OSC expects registrants to place client interests above their own. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's complete financial picture and objectives. This should be followed by a diligent research and analysis of potential investment products, evaluating their alignment with the client's profile and regulatory requirements. Documentation of the entire process, including client discussions, assessments, and recommendations, is crucial for demonstrating compliance and ethical conduct. When in doubt, seeking guidance from compliance departments or legal counsel is a prudent step. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a financial advisor in Ontario has received a request from a provincial securities regulator for client-specific trading data related to a particular period. The advisor is concerned about client confidentiality, but also recognizes the importance of cooperating with regulatory oversight. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Immediately forward all client trading data for the specified period to the regulator to ensure full cooperation and avoid any perception of obstruction. Option B. Provide a summary of trading activity that omits specific client identifiers and sensitive transaction details, believing this offers a balance between cooperation and privacy. Option C. politely decline to provide any client information, citing strict client confidentiality agreements without further inquiry into the regulator's authority or the specific nature of the request. Option D. Verify the regulator's request, clarify the specific information required and its legal basis, and then provide only the mandated information through secure, authorized channels, considering any client notification requirements under Ontario privacy legislation. The correct answer is D. Verify the regulator's request, clarify the specific information required and its legal basis, and then provide only the mandated information through secure, authorized channels, considering any client notification requirements under Ontario privacy legislation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect client confidentiality and ensure data integrity. A financial advisor must act in the best interests of their client while adhering to the strict data protection laws of Ontario. The pressure to provide a quick response to a regulator, especially when dealing with potentially sensitive information, can lead to hasty decisions that compromise compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured and compliant approach to information disclosure. This means verifying the request's legitimacy, understanding the scope of information required, and then responding in a manner that is both transparent and protective of client data. Specifically, it involves confirming the regulator's authority, clarifying the exact nature of the information sought, and then providing only the data that is legally mandated, often through secure, authorized channels, and with appropriate client notification, where required by Ontario's Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act (PIPEDA) or equivalent provincial privacy legislation. This approach upholds client trust and ensures adherence to legal frameworks governing data privacy and regulatory cooperation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately providing all requested client information without verification. This fails to respect client confidentiality and may violate Ontario's privacy laws by disclosing more information than is legally required or authorized. Bypasses necessary checks and balances, potentially exposing sensitive data unnecessarily. Another incorrect approach is to refuse to provide any information, citing confidentiality without attempting to understand the regulator's legitimate needs or legal authority. While confidentiality is paramount, outright refusal without engagement can be seen as obstruction and may have negative repercussions, potentially violating regulatory cooperation requirements. A third incorrect approach is to provide incomplete or misleading information. This is ethically unsound and can lead to regulatory penalties. It undermines the integrity of the financial advisory profession and demonstrates a lack of diligence in handling regulatory inquiries. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such requests should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, they must verify the identity and authority of the requesting party. Second, they should clearly understand the scope and legal basis for the information request. Third, they must consult relevant internal policies and legal counsel if necessary. Fourth, they should gather and provide only the information that is strictly required, using secure and authorized methods, while considering any client notification obligations under Ontario law. This structured approach ensures compliance, protects client interests, and maintains professional integrity. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in London, UK, has expressed a strong preference for an investment with a significantly higher risk profile than what is deemed appropriate based on their stated financial goals and risk tolerance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred high-risk investment immediately to respect their stated wishes. Option B. Refuse to consider the client's preferred investment and insist on a lower-risk option without further discussion. Option C. Recommend a diversified portfolio that includes a small allocation to the higher-risk investment, without fully explaining the potential downsides of that specific allocation. Option D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand their reasoning. Explain the risks and benefits of the preferred investment versus more suitable alternatives, and document their informed decision. Correct answer is D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand their reasoning. Explain the risks and benefits of the preferred investment versus more suitable alternatives, and document their informed decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate the client's autonomy while upholding regulatory obligations and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to balance client wishes with professional responsibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their preference for a higher-risk investment. This approach prioritizes client education and informed consent. The advisor should explain the potential downsides of the chosen investment, such as increased volatility and the possibility of capital loss, and contrast it with the benefits of a more diversified, lower-risk portfolio aligned with their stated objectives and risk tolerance. If, after this comprehensive discussion, the client still insists on the higher-risk investment, and it does not outright violate any specific regulatory prohibitions or the firm's policies, the advisor should document this conversation extensively, including the client's understanding of the risks and their explicit instruction, before proceeding. This aligns with the principles of client-centric advice and the duty to ensure clients understand the implications of their investment decisions, as mandated by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, in the UK, which emphasizes treating customers fairly and ensuring suitability of advice. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the higher-risk investment without a detailed discussion about its implications and potential downsides fails to meet the FCA's requirement for suitability and treating customers fairly. It prioritizes the client's stated preference over a comprehensive assessment of their best interests, potentially exposing them to undue risk. Proceeding with the investment solely based on the client's initial request, without ensuring they fully comprehend the risks involved, constitutes a failure to adequately advise and could lead to a complaint or regulatory action. Another incorrect approach would be to refuse the client's request outright without exploring the underlying reasons or offering suitable alternatives. While the advisor has a duty to ensure suitability, a complete refusal without further dialogue can damage the client relationship and may not be the most constructive way to manage the situation, especially if the client's preference stems from a misunderstanding that could be clarified. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by an assessment of suitable investment options. When a client expresses a preference that deviates from the most suitable recommendation, the professional must engage in a dialogue to understand the client's reasoning, educate them on the risks and benefits of all options, and ensure informed consent. Documentation of these discussions is crucial. If the client's preference, after full disclosure and understanding, still poses an unacceptable risk or violates regulatory guidelines, the professional must clearly articulate why they cannot proceed and offer alternative solutions that align with both the client's needs and regulatory requirements. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Ontario, Canada, has expressed a strong desire to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that does not align with their previously established moderate risk tolerance and long-term financial goals. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Politely decline to offer advice on this specific investment, stating that it falls outside the advisor's area of expertise or comfort level, and suggest the client seek advice elsewhere. Option B. Engage in a detailed, documented discussion with the client to explain the risks associated with the proposed investment, explore the client's motivations for this preference, and present alternative investment strategies that better align with their stated objectives and risk profile. Option C. Immediately execute the client's requested investment to honor their explicit instructions, assuming the client is fully aware of the potential consequences. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, but make a note in the client's file that the investment was made against the advisor's recommendation. Correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed, documented discussion with the client to explain the risks associated with the proposed investment, explore the client's motivations for this preference, and present alternative investment strategies that better align with their stated objectives and risk profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or expose them to undue risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements while maintaining client trust and providing sound financial advice. The specific jurisdiction of Ontario, Canada, mandates adherence to provincial securities legislation and the regulatory framework governing financial advisors. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client that clearly outlines the risks and potential downsides of their preferred investment strategy, while also presenting suitable alternatives that align with their stated objectives and risk tolerance. This approach prioritizes the advisor's fiduciary duty to provide advice in the client's best interest, as mandated by Ontario securities law. It involves educating the client about the implications of their choices, ensuring they make an informed decision, and documenting this entire process. This upholds the principles of suitability and client protection, which are cornerstones of regulatory compliance in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately executing the client's request without further discussion or assessment. This fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest and could lead to a breach of suitability rules under Ontario securities legislation, as the advisor has not adequately assessed whether the requested investment is appropriate for the client's circumstances. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright and refuse to consider it, without providing a clear explanation or offering alternatives. This can damage the client relationship and may not fully explore the client's underlying motivations or financial goals, potentially missing an opportunity to guide them towards a more appropriate solution. While the advisor has a duty to recommend suitable investments, a complete refusal without dialogue is not best practice. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's request, but fail to document the discussion about the risks and the client's understanding. This omission creates a significant regulatory risk, as it leaves the advisor unable to demonstrate that they fulfilled their duty of care and that the client made an informed decision. Lack of documentation is a common pitfall that can lead to disciplinary action under Ontario securities regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's stated needs and objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment knowledge. When a client's request appears to deviate from their best interests or regulatory suitability standards, the professional must engage in a transparent and documented dialogue. This dialogue should involve explaining the rationale behind their professional judgment, outlining potential risks and benefits, and presenting suitable alternatives. The ultimate goal is to empower the client to make an informed decision, with the advisor acting as a trusted guide and ensuring all actions are compliant with relevant provincial regulations. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is considering recommending an investment product that offers a significantly higher commission and a manufacturer-sponsored bonus compared to other suitable alternatives. The advisor believes the product is still appropriate for the client's needs, but the financial benefit to the advisor is substantial. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the advisor to take in this situation? Option A. Recommend the product that is most aligned with the client's best interests, even if it offers a lower commission or bonus to the advisor. Option B. Recommend the product with the highest commission and bonus, as it is still considered suitable for the client's needs. Option C. Recommend the product with the highest commission and bonus, provided the advisor discloses the incentives to the client. Option D. Recommend a product that meets the minimum suitability requirements and offers a moderate commission, avoiding the highest incentive products. The correct answer is A. Recommend the product that is most aligned with the client's best interests, even if it offers a lower commission or bonus to the advisor. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict of interest for financial advisors in Ontario, Canada, when recommending investment products. This scenario is professionally challenging because advisors have a fiduciary duty to act in their clients' best interests, yet they may be incentivized by product manufacturers through higher commissions or bonuses. Balancing this duty with personal financial gain requires careful judgment and adherence to strict ethical and regulatory standards. The best professional practice involves prioritizing client interests above all else, even if it means recommending a product with a lower commission for the advisor. This approach aligns with the core principles of client-centric advice mandated by regulatory bodies in Ontario, such as the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, FSRA. Specifically, the client-focused approach ensures compliance with the fiduciary duty and the best interest of the client standard, which is paramount in financial advisory services. It demonstrates a commitment to transparency and ethical conduct, fostering trust and long-term client relationships. Recommending products solely based on the highest commission, even if they are suitable for the client, is ethically unacceptable. This practice violates the fiduciary duty and the best interest of the client standard, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. It prioritizes the advisor's financial gain over the client's well-being, suggesting products that are only marginally suitable for the client but offer significant personal incentives, while disclosing these incentives is still problematic. While disclosure is important, it does not absolve the advisor of the primary obligation to recommend the most suitable product. The inherent conflict of interest remains, and the disclosure may not be sufficient to overcome the potential for undue influence on the client's decision. Focusing on products that meet minimum suitability requirements without actively seeking the absolute best option for the client, even if those options offer lower commissions, falls short of the highest professional standards. While not as egregious as prioritizing high commissions, it still represents a failure to fully uphold the fiduciary duty to actively seek out and recommend the most advantageous solutions for the client. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's needs, risk tolerance, and financial goals. This understanding must then be used to identify a range of suitable products. The advisor's personal financial incentives should be a secondary consideration, and in cases of conflict, the client's best interest must unequivocally take precedence. Transparency about all potential conflicts and incentives is crucial, but it should supplement, not replace, the primary obligation to act in the client's best interest. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Ontario, Canada, wishes to withdraw funds from their Registered Retirement Savings Plan, RRSP, under the Home Buyers Plan, HBP, to purchase a home. The client mentions they are aware of a small penalty for early withdrawal, but are primarily focused on securing the property quickly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor? Option A. Immediately proceed with the RRSP withdrawal under the HBP as requested by the client to expedite the home purchase, as the client has indicated awareness of a small penalty. Option B. Recommend a high-risk, non-registered investment product that could potentially generate faster returns to cover the down payment, bypassing the need for RRSP withdrawal. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's overall financial situation, long-term goals, and risk tolerance, explaining the tax implications, potential penalties, and the impact on their retirement savings of using the HBP, while also exploring alternative financing options. Option D. Advise the client that the decision is theirs alone and simply process the RRSP withdrawal request without further discussion or analysis of the long-term consequences. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's overall financial situation, long-term goals, and risk tolerance, explaining the tax implications, potential penalties, and the impact on their retirement savings of using the HBP, while also exploring alternative financing options. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the client's immediate financial needs with the fiduciary duty to act in their best long-term interests, all within the specific regulatory framework of Ontario, Canada. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that advice provided is suitable and not unduly influenced by personal gain or the client's short-term emotional state. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine financial distress and a potentially impulsive decision that could have detrimental long-term consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's overall financial situation, including their long-term goals, risk tolerance, and the implications of withdrawing funds from their Registered Retirement Savings Plan, RRSP, under the Home Buyers Plan, HBP. This approach prioritizes the client's best interests by ensuring they fully understand the tax implications, potential penalties, and the impact on their retirement savings. It aligns with the fiduciary duty mandated by Ontario securities law and the ethical guidelines of the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada, MFDA, which require advisors to act with integrity and diligence, providing advice that is suitable for the client. This involves a detailed discussion about alternative financing options and the long-term consequences of depleting retirement savings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately proceeding with the RRSP withdrawal based solely on the client's stated desire to avoid a small penalty. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty to act in the client's best long-term interests. Ontario securities regulations and MFDA rules emphasize suitability and the need for comprehensive advice, not just transactional execution. Ignoring the broader financial implications and the potential for more significant long-term harm, e.g., reduced retirement security, constitutes a failure to provide adequate advice. Another incorrect approach is to suggest a less regulated or non-registered investment vehicle as an alternative to the RRSP withdrawal without a full suitability assessment. This could expose the client to inappropriate risks and potentially violate regulations designed to protect investors. The advisor must ensure all recommendations are suitable for the client's specific circumstances and risk profile, as mandated by Ontario's securities laws. A third incorrect approach is to defer the decision entirely to the client, without providing comprehensive information and guidance on the implications of their choice. While client autonomy is important, the advisor has a professional responsibility to educate the client about the financial consequences of their decisions, especially when dealing with registered plans and significant financial commitments. Failing to do so, and simply executing the client's request without due diligence, can be seen as a dereliction of professional duty under Ontario's regulatory framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's stated need, followed by a comprehensive fact-finding exercise to gather all relevant financial information. This includes understanding their goals, risk tolerance, and current financial situation. The next step is to analyze the implications of various options, considering regulatory requirements, ethical obligations, and the client's best interests. Finally, the professional should present clear, unbiased advice, ensuring the client fully comprehends the consequences of their chosen course of action before proceeding with any transaction. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Ontario, Canada, expresses a strong preference for an investment product that carries higher risk and associated fees, despite the advisor's initial assessment suggesting a more conservative approach might be more suitable for the client's stated financial goals. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Recommend the higher risk, higher fee product and immediately proceed with the transaction without further discussion of risks or alternatives. Option B. Proceed with recommending the higher risk, higher fee product as requested by the client to ensure client satisfaction. Option C. Politely decline to recommend the higher risk product and insist on proceeding with a more conservative investment option that the advisor deems more appropriate. Option D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the underlying reasons for their preference, explain the implications of higher risk and fees, and explore alternative suitable options before making a recommendation. The correct answer is D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the underlying reasons for their preference, explain the implications of higher risk and fees, and explore alternative suitable options before making a recommendation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference might lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring compliance with regulatory obligations while maintaining client trust and providing sound financial guidance. The specific jurisdiction of Ontario, Canada, dictates the regulatory framework governing this interaction. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the client's motivations and financial situation before proceeding with any recommendation. This approach prioritizes a comprehensive discovery process to identify the underlying reasons for the client's preference for a higher risk, higher fee product. It requires the advisor to explain the implications of different investment choices, including the trade-offs between risk, return, and fees in a clear and understandable manner. This aligns with the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) Rule 31-505 registration requirements, which mandates that registrants must act honestly, in good faith, and in the best interests of their clients. Furthermore, the client-focused approach inherent in this option supports the principles of suitability and know your client obligations, ensuring that any recommendation is appropriate for the client's specific circumstances, risk tolerance, and investment objectives. Incorrect approach is analysis, recommending the higher risk, higher fee product solely based on the client's stated preference without a deeper investigation into their financial situation and understanding of the implications, is a failure to meet the duty of care and suitability obligations. This approach risks prioritizing potential commission over the client's best interests, which is a direct contravention of the OSC's requirements. Another incorrect approach involves dismissing the client's preference outright and insisting on a low-risk option, without exploring the client's rationale or educating them on the potential benefits and drawbacks of various choices. This can alienate the client and fail to address their underlying financial goals or concerns. Finally, proceeding with the client's request without any discussion of the associated risks, fees, or alternative options, and without documenting the rationale for the decision, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold professional standards and regulatory expectations for client advice and record-keeping. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive client discovery. This involves actively listening to the client's stated preferences, probing to understand the why behind those preferences, and assessing their financial knowledge, risk tolerance, and overall financial situation. Following discovery, the professional should present a range of suitable options, clearly outlining the pros and cons of each, including associated risks, fees, and potential returns. The client should be empowered to make an informed decision, with the professional acting as a trusted advisor, guiding them through the process. Documentation of the entire process, including client discussions and the rationale for the final decision, is crucial for regulatory compliance and professional accountability. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a significant data breach impacting client confidentiality. As a senior associate at a law firm in Ontario, Canada, you have discovered that clients' sensitive financial documents were inadvertently sent to an incorrect recipient via email due to an internal system error. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold your professional and regulatory obligations? Option A. Halt all client communications and operations temporarily while a full investigation is conducted, without immediately informing clients of the specific incident. Option B. Inform only the clients whose data was directly compromised, providing minimal details about the incident to avoid causing undue alarm, and implement a minor patch to the email system. Option C. Disclose the breach to the relevant regulatory body, but delay client notification until the internal investigation is fully complete and all potential liabilities are assessed. Option D. Immediately implement enhanced security protocols. Notify all affected clients transparently and promptly about the breach and the steps being taken, and initiate a thorough internal review to identify and rectify the root cause of the error. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement enhanced security protocols. Notify all affected clients transparently and promptly about the breach and the steps being taken, and initiate a thorough internal review to identify and rectify the root cause of the error. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a significant data breach impacting client confidentiality. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate operational needs of the firm with the long-term regulatory obligations and ethical duties owed to clients. A hasty decision could lead to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment and mitigation strategy that prioritizes client data protection in accordance with the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act (PIPEDA) in Ontario, Canada. This includes immediately implementing enhanced security protocols, notifying affected clients in a transparent and timely manner as mandated by PIPEDA, and conducting a thorough post-incident review to prevent future occurrences. This aligns with the PIPEDA principles of accountability, identifying purposes, consent, and collection limitations, as well as the ethical duty of care and confidentiality owed to clients. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the severity of the breach and only implement minimal security updates without informing clients. This fails to meet the transparency and notification requirements of PIPTA, potentially leading to significant fines and legal action. It also breaches the ethical obligation to act in the best interests of the client and maintain their trust. Another incorrect approach is to immediately cease all operations without a clear plan for data recovery or client communication. While appearing decisive, this can cause undue panic and disruption for clients and may not be the most effective way to contain the breach or protect data. PIPTA emphasizes a measured and informed response. Finally, an approach that involves selectively notifying only a subset of clients based on perceived impact, without a full understanding of the breach's scope, is also professionally unacceptable. PIPTA requires a comprehensive and equitable approach to notification, ensuring all potentially affected individuals are informed. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process. First, understand the full scope and potential impact of the incident. Second, consult relevant regulatory frameworks like PIPTA and internal policies. Third, develop a multifaceted mitigation and communication plan that prioritizes client protection and regulatory compliance. And fourth, execute the plan with clear accountability and a commitment to continuous improvement. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a client in Ontario wishes to withdraw $25,000 from an investment portfolio to cover an unexpected expense. The investment is projected to generate a consistent annual return of 7% for the next 10 years. If the client withdraws the funds now, they will forego all future returns on that principal amount, assuming a discount rate of 7% for the purpose of calculating the net present value of the foregone returns. What is the net present value of the future returns the client will miss out on by withdrawing the $25,000 today? Option A. The net present value of the foregone returns is $48,000. Option B. The net present value of the foregone returns is $25,000. Option C. The net present value of the foregone returns is $30,000. Option D. The net present value of the foregone returns is $20,000. The correct answer is B. The net present value of the foregone returns is $25,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial needs and the long-term implications of their investment decisions, particularly in the context of the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations. The advisor must balance providing accurate, actionable advice with ensuring the client understands the risks and potential consequences of their choices. The mathematical component adds a layer of complexity, requiring the advisor to not only understand the client's situation, but also to accurately quantify the financial impact of different strategies. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough analysis of the client's financial situation, including their current income, expenses, debts, and future financial goals, as well as a clear understanding of their risk tolerance. This approach prioritizes the client's best interests by providing a data-driven recommendation that aligns with their overall financial well-being. Specifically, it requires the advisor to calculate the net present value, NPV, of the investment, considering the time value of money and the required rate of return, to determine if the proposed investment is financially sound and offers a positive return relative to alternative opportunities or the cost of capital. This aligns with the OSC's requirement for registrants to act with integrity and in the best interests of their clients, ensuring that advice is suitable and based on a comprehensive understanding of the client's circumstances and the investment's financial viability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately approving the client's request based solely on their stated desire to access funds, without performing a detailed financial analysis or calculating the investment's potential return. This fails to meet the OSC's obligation for advisors to conduct thorough due diligence and provide suitable recommendations. It disregards the time value of money and the potential for the investment to generate a return that could offset the immediate need for funds or even exceed it. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the immediate withdrawal amount without considering the impact on the investment's future growth potential or the client's long-term financial security. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of investment principles and the advisor's fiduciary duty. It neglects the OSC's emphasis on ensuring clients are fully informed of the consequences of their financial decisions. A further incorrect approach is to provide a recommendation based on a simple calculation of the withdrawal amount, without considering the opportunity cost or the investment's internal rate of return. This superficial analysis fails to provide the client with a comprehensive understanding of whether this is the most financially advantageous decision for them. It overlooks the OSC's expectation that advisors will offer advice that is both prudent and maximizes client benefit. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive client needs assessment. This includes understanding their financial goals, risk tolerance, and current financial standing. Following this, a detailed analysis of any proposed investment or financial action is crucial, employing relevant financial metrics and calculations. The advisor must then present a clear, unbiased recommendation, supported by data and explanations of potential outcomes, ensuring the client is fully informed. This process aligns with regulatory requirements for suitability, integrity, and client best interests, fostering trust and responsible financial management. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an Ontario-based financial advisor has received a request from a securities regulator for specific client financial information related to a market surveillance inquiry. The advisor believes this information could be beneficial for the regulator to understand the client's trading patterns, but the client has not explicitly consented to the disclosure of their personal financial details. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor in Ontario? Option A. Provide the requested financial information to the regulator immediately, as it is for the regulator's understanding and ultimately for market integrity. Option B. Inform the client about the regulator's request and seek their explicit written consent before disclosing any information. Option C. Provide generalized information about the client's trading activity without revealing specific account details, to avoid breaching confidentiality while still being somewhat helpful. Option D. Politely decline to provide any information, citing client confidentiality as an absolute barrier. Correct answer is B. Inform the client about the regulator's request and seek their explicit written consent before disclosing any information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the obligation to protect client confidentiality and adhere to regulatory requirements. The financial advisor must act diligently and ethically, recognizing that unauthorized disclosure of information, even with good intentions, can have severe legal and professional repercussions. The specific jurisdiction of Ontario, Canada, dictates the framework for such interactions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves directly informing the client about the request and seeking their explicit consent before disclosing any information. This approach upholds the principle of client confidentiality, a cornerstone of professional conduct and a requirement under Ontario's securities legislation and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, IIROC, rules. Obtaining consent ensures that the client is aware of and agrees to the sharing of their personal financial details, thereby respecting their autonomy and privacy. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the legal obligations to protect client information. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves providing the requested information without client consent, arguing that it is for the client's benefit. This is a direct violation of client confidentiality principles and Ontario's privacy laws, such as the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, as it applies to federally regulated entities and potentially provincial equivalents if applicable. It also contravenes IIROC rules regarding client information and privacy. Another incorrect approach is to refuse to engage with the regulator altogether, citing confidentiality. While confidentiality is paramount, regulators have legitimate investigative powers. A complete refusal without attempting to obtain client consent or seeking clarification on the scope of the request can be seen as obstructive and may lead to regulatory sanctions. A third incorrect approach is to provide vague, non-specific information that might allude to the client's situation without revealing actual details. While seemingly a middle ground, this can still be misleading to the regulator and does not fully address the request. It also risks inadvertently disclosing information if not handled with extreme care, and it fails to proactively manage the situation by involving the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such requests should first understand the nature and authority of the requesting party. If it's a regulator, they should ascertain the legal basis for the request. The primary decision-making framework should prioritize client consent for any disclosure of personal financial information. If consent cannot be obtained or is refused, the professional should explore with the client and the regulator alternative ways to address the regulator's needs, such as providing aggregated data or anonymized information, if appropriate and legally permissible. Legal counsel should be consulted if there is any ambiguity regarding disclosure obligations or rights. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that a financial advisor in Ontario has a client who expresses a strong preference for investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a single, highly speculative sector. Despite the client's previously stated moderate risk tolerance and long-term retirement goals, the advisor has concerns that this concentration will expose the client to excessive risk and potentially hinder their ability to achieve their stated financial objectives. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor to take? Option A. Agree to the client's request but subtly steer them towards other, less risky investments over time without explicitly discussing the change. Option B. Proceed with the client's preferred investment strategy as requested, prioritizing client satisfaction over the advisor's concerns about risk. Option C. Immediately dismiss the client's preference and insist on a diversified portfolio that the advisor deems more suitable, without further discussion of the client's rationale. Option D. Thoroughly explain the risks and benefits of the client's preferred investment strategy, detailing how it deviates from a diversified approach aligned with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, and document the client's informed decision. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly explain the risks and benefits of the client's preferred investment strategy, detailing how it deviates from a diversified approach aligned with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, and document the client's informed decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance while adhering to regulatory requirements and ethical principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and client well-being. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly explaining the risks and benefits of the client's preferred investment strategy, highlighting how it deviates from a diversified approach that aligns with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance. This includes providing clear, understandable information about potential downsides, such as increased volatility or underperformance compared to a more balanced portfolio. The advisor must then document this discussion and the client's informed decision, ensuring the client understands the implications of their choice. This approach is correct because it upholds the advisor's fiduciary duty under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations, which mandate that advisors must act honestly, in good faith, and with a view to the best interests of the client. It also aligns with the OSC's client-focused reforms, emphasizing suitability and disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the client's preferred strategy without a detailed explanation of the risks and alternatives fails to meet the duty of care and suitability requirements under OSC regulations. This approach prioritizes client satisfaction over client best interests, potentially exposing the client to undue risk. Proceeding with the client's request solely based on their stated preference, without a comprehensive discussion of the implications, is a direct violation of the advisor's obligation to provide suitable recommendations. Another incorrect approach involves dismissing the client's preference outright and insisting on a different strategy without fully understanding the client's rationale or providing adequate justification for the alternative. While the advisor has a duty to recommend suitable investments, a complete disregard for client input can damage the client relationship and may not be the most effective way to achieve compliance or client trust. Finally, agreeing to the client's request and then subtly steering them towards other investments later without explicit disclosure is deceptive and violates transparency requirements mandated by the OSC. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client best interests, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. This involves actively listening to client preferences, understanding their underlying motivations, and then providing clear, objective advice that aligns with their stated goals and risk tolerance. When a client's preference conflicts with these principles, the professional must engage in a thorough educational dialogue, clearly outlining risks, benefits, and alternatives, and meticulously documenting the client's informed decision. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clearer guidance on handling potentially suspicious client transactions within the financial services sector in Ontario. A financial advisor has a long-standing client who is now attempting to conduct a series of complex, unusually large cash transactions that deviate significantly from their established financial patterns. The advisor has a gut feeling that something is not right, but lacks concrete evidence of illegal activity. What is the most appropriate course of action for the financial advisor in Ontario? Option A. Confront the client directly, asking them to explain the unusual nature and size of the cash transactions. Option B. Proceed with the transactions as requested by the client, assuming the client is acting within their legal rights and that the advisor's intuition is unfounded. Option C. Immediately file a suspicious transaction report, STR, with FinTrack, detailing the advisor's suspicions without further investigation. Option D. Discreetly gather additional information to understand the nature of the transactions and the client's rationale, while preparing to file a suspicious transaction report, STR, if suspicions are substantiated by reasonable grounds. The correct answer is D. Discreetly gather additional information to understand the nature of the transactions and the client's rationale, while preparing to file a suspicious transaction report, STR, if suspicions are substantiated by reasonable grounds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the regulatory obligation to report suspicious activities. The financial advisor must navigate the delicate balance of respecting client privacy while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to anti-money laundering (AML) regulations in Ontario. Failure to act appropriately could result in severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and harm to the integrity of the financial system. Careful judgment is required to identify when suspicion crosses the threshold for reporting without making unsubstantiated accusations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves discreetly gathering further information to substantiate or allay suspicions, while simultaneously preparing to file a suspicious transaction report, STR, if the suspicion persists and is based on reasonable grounds. This approach respects client confidentiality as much as possible during the initial information gathering phase. If after reasonable inquiry, the suspicion remains, the advisor is then ethically and legally obligated under Ontario's Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, PCMLTFA, and FinTrack guidelines to report the activity. This staged approach ensures compliance with reporting obligations without prematurely breaching client trust or making unfounded allegations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately report the transaction to FinTrack without any further investigation. This fails to respect client confidentiality and could lead to unnecessary reporting, potentially damaging the client relationship and wasting regulatory resources. It also bypasses the professional responsibility to conduct reasonable inquiries when faced with a potentially suspicious situation. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious activity and continue with the transaction. This is a direct violation of AML regulations in Ontario and the PCMLTFA, which mandate reporting of suspicious transactions. It exposes the advisor and their firm to significant penalties and contributes to the facilitation of illicit financial activities. A third incorrect approach is to confront the client directly about the suspicions. While transparency is generally valued, in AML contexts, confronting a client about suspicions can tip them off, allowing them to alter their behavior or destroy evidence, thereby hindering any potential investigation by law enforcement. This action would also likely breach client confidentiality prematurely and could be seen as an attempt to solicit an explanation that is not a regulatory requirement at that stage. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the potential red flags and assess their significance against established AML typologies and internal policies. Second, conduct discreet, reasonable inquiries to gather more information without alerting the client. Third, if suspicions remain and are based on reasonable grounds, consult with the firm's compliance officer or legal counsel. Fourth, if the decision to report is made, follow the prescribed procedures for filing an SDR with FINTRAC promptly and accurately. Throughout this process, maintaining detailed records of observations, inquiries, and decisions is crucial. Question 14. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in the average time taken to resolve customer complaints at a financial advisory firm operating in Ontario, Canada. This trend has been observed over the last 2 quarters. What is the most appropriate regulatory and ethical response for the firm's management? Option A. Publicly attribute the increased complaint resolution times to external market volatility and increased client inquiry volume, while implementing minor procedural tweaks to the complaint handling system without a thorough investigation into systemic issues. Option B. Immediately inform all affected clients about the observed delays, provide a clear explanation of the contributing factors, and outline the specific remedial actions being implemented to expedite complaint resolution, while simultaneously initiating a comprehensive internal review to identify and address the root causes of the delays. Option C. Focus exclusively on optimizing internal complaint handling processes and staff training to reduce resolution times, without proactively communicating the current delays to clients, assuming that improved future performance will address client dissatisfaction. Option D. Issue a general statement to all clients acknowledging potential service delays and offering a small, standardized compensation for any inconvenience, without conducting a detailed root cause analysis of the complaint resolution times. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform all affected clients about the observed delays, provide a clear explanation of the contributing factors, and outline the specific remedial actions being implemented to expedite complaint resolution, while simultaneously initiating a comprehensive internal review to identify and address the root causes of the delays. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in customer complaint resolution times for a financial advisory firm operating in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts client trust and the firm's reputation, while also exposing it to potential regulatory scrutiny under Ontario's securities laws and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, IIROC, rules. A failure to address these delays effectively could lead to client dissatisfaction, loss of business, and disciplinary actions. The best approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy coupled with a thorough internal review. This means acknowledging the delays to affected clients, explaining the reasons without making excuses, and outlining the concrete steps being taken to expedite resolution. Simultaneously, the firm must conduct an in-depth analysis of the root causes of the delays, which could include staffing issues, process inefficiencies, or system limitations. Implementing targeted improvements based on this analysis and communicating progress to clients demonstrates a commitment to service excellence and regulatory compliance. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to clients and the regulatory expectation of prompt and fair complaint handling. An approach that focuses solely on internal process improvements without informing clients about the delays is professionally deficient. It risks further eroding client trust by appearing secretive or dismissive of their concerns. While internal improvements are necessary, neglecting client communication violates the principle of transparency and can be seen as a failure to adequately address client grievances in a timely manner, which is a key IIROC expectation. Another unacceptable approach is to offer superficial apologies and minor adjustments without undertaking a comprehensive root cause analysis. This superficial response fails to address the underlying systemic issues that are causing the delays. It is unlikely to satisfy clients or prevent future occurrences, and regulators would likely view this as a lack of genuine commitment to resolving client issues effectively. Finally, an approach that blames external factors or individual staff members without taking collective responsibility and implementing systemic solutions is also professionally unsound. While external factors can contribute, a firm has a responsibility to manage its operations and client relationships effectively. Shifting blame without a clear plan for improvement demonstrates a lack of leadership and accountability, which is contrary to both ethical conduct and regulatory expectations for robust complaint management. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client interests and regulatory adherence. This involves 1. Identifying the problem and its potential impact. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including performance data and client feedback. 3. Evaluating potential solutions against regulatory requirements and ethical principles. 4. Implementing the chosen solution with clear communication and accountability. 5. Monitoring the effectiveness of the solution and making adjustments as needed. Question 15. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in the average response time for customer inquiries at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. Which of the following actions best addresses this issue while adhering to regulatory expectations for client service and operational integrity? Option A. Implement a policy to defer all non-urgent client inquiries for at least 48 hours to allow advisors to focus on more pressing matters. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of inquiry handling processes, advisor workload distribution, and communication tools to identify specific causes for the delay and implement targeted improvements. Option C. Immediately assign additional client inquiries to advisors, assuming they are underutilized, to increase overall output and reduce backlog. Option D. Attribute the decline in response times solely to increased market volatility and advise clients that longer response times are unavoidable. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of inquiry handling processes, advisor workload distribution, and communication tools to identify specific causes for the delay and implement targeted improvements. Explanation. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in the average response time for customer inquiries at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts client satisfaction and could indicate systemic issues within the firm's operational efficiency. Failing to address this decline promptly could lead to reputational damage, loss of clients, and potential regulatory scrutiny under Ontario's securities laws, particularly those governing fair dealing with clients and operational integrity. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause and implement effective solutions without compromising service quality or regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the causes of the increased response times. This includes analyzing the types of inquiries, the workload distribution among advisors, the effectiveness of current communication tools, and any recent changes in staffing or processes. The goal is to identify specific bottlenecks or inefficiencies and then develop targeted solutions, such as implementing new customer relationship management (CRM) software, providing additional training on efficient inquiry handling, or reallocating resources. This proactive and analytical method aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct expected of financial advisors in Ontario, ensuring that client needs are met promptly and effectively, thereby upholding the duty of care and fair dealing obligations under securities regulations. An approach that focuses solely on increasing advisor workload without investigating the underlying causes is professionally unacceptable. This could exacerbate existing issues, lead to burnout, and potentially compromise the quality of advice provided, violating the duty to act in the client's best interest. Similarly, implementing a blanket policy to defer non-urgent inquiries without a clear framework for defining urgent or ensuring timely follow-up risks neglecting client needs and could be seen as a failure to deal fairly with clients, a key regulatory requirement in Ontario. Finally, attributing the decline solely to external factors without internal review ignores the firm's responsibility to manage its operations effectively and maintain adequate systems and controls, which is a fundamental expectation under Ontario securities law. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with objective data analysis. When performance metrics indicate a negative trend, the first step is to gather all relevant data to understand the scope and potential causes. This should be followed by a brainstorming session to identify potential solutions, evaluating each solution against regulatory requirements, ethical considerations, and business objectives. The chosen solution should then be implemented with clear communication and a plan for ongoing monitoring and evaluation to ensure its effectiveness and compliance. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that a client in Ontario has expressed a strong desire to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in a single, highly speculative junior mining stock, citing a hot tip from an acquaintance. As a registered financial advisor in Ontario, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and uphold your professional obligations? Option A. Politely decline to execute the trade, informing the client that the investment is too risky and that you will not be involved. Option B. Proceed with the purchase of the stock, but make a brief note in the client's file stating that the instruction came from a hot tip. Option C. Immediately execute the client's instruction to purchase the specified stock, as the client has the ultimate authority over their investment decisions. Option D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand their investment objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation, and then assess whether the proposed investment aligns with these factors and is suitable according to Ontario Securities Commission regulations. The correct answer is D. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand their investment objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation, and then assess whether the proposed investment aligns with these factors and is suitable according to Ontario Securities Commission regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the client's stated desire for a specific investment strategy with the advisor's fiduciary duty and the regulatory obligations under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) rules. The advisor must ensure that the client's instructions are not only understood but also compliant with regulations, particularly concerning suitability and the prevention of market manipulation. The potential for a conflict of interest or a misunderstanding of the client's true intentions necessitates careful judgment and adherence to established compliance procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding of the client's investment objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation, and then assessing whether the proposed strategy aligns with these factors and regulatory requirements. This approach prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance by ensuring that any investment recommendation or execution is suitable and does not contravene OSC regulations, such as those related to suitability obligations, e.g., National Instrument 31-103 registration requirements, exemptions, and ongoing registrant obligations. It involves open communication with the client to clarify intentions and educate them on potential risks and regulatory considerations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately executing the client's instruction without further inquiry. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations under OSC regulations. It risks facilitating an investment that is not in the client's best interest or could be construed as manipulative trading, which is prohibited. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without understanding the underlying rationale or exploring alternative compliance strategies. This can damage the client relationship and may overlook a legitimate, albeit perhaps poorly articulated, investment goal that could be met through compliant means. It also fails to meet the obligation to provide appropriate advice. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the instruction while making only superficial notes about the client's request, without actively verifying understanding or assessing compliance. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adequately document the decision-making process, which is crucial for regulatory scrutiny and client protection. It suggests a potential disregard for the advisor's responsibilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric and compliance-first mindset. When faced with unusual or potentially problematic client instruction, the decision-making process should involve 1. Active listening and seeking clarification to fully understand the client's objectives. 2. Assessing the proposed action against regulatory requirements, e.g., suitability, anti-manipulation rules under OSC regulations. 3. Documenting all discussions, assessments, and decisions thoroughly. 4. If necessary, educating the client on regulatory constraints and offering compliant alternatives. 5. Escalating concerns to compliance or legal departments if uncertainty or significant risk remains. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores related to the onboarding process for new clients at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliant response to address this trend? Option A. Issue a general memo to all advisors emphasizing the importance of client satisfaction and instructing them to individually address any client concerns during onboarding. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the onboarding process, gather detailed client feedback, identify specific pain points, and implement targeted improvements in compliance with OSC and EROC regulations. Option C. Focus solely on improving the firm's marketing materials to highlight the positive aspects of the client experience, assuming the onboarding issues are minor. Option D. Implement a firm-wide mandatory client appreciation event to boost morale and indirectly improve satisfaction with the onboarding experience. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the onboarding process, gather detailed client feedback, identify specific pain points, and implement targeted improvements in compliance with OSC and EROC regulations. Explanation: the performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores related to the onboarding process for new clients at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts client retention and the firm's reputation, requiring a proactive and compliant response. The firm must address the root cause of dissatisfaction while adhering to the regulatory framework governing financial advisors in Ontario, specifically the regulations enforced by the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, EROC, for its members. The best approach involves a thorough, data-driven investigation into the specific pain points of the onboarding process. This includes gathering detailed feedback from clients who have recently onboarded, analyzing internal process documentation, and identifying any potential gaps or inefficiencies. The firm should then develop and implement targeted improvements based on this analysis, ensuring all changes comply with OSC and EROC requirements for client communication, disclosure, and suitability. This proactive and evidence-based strategy demonstrates a commitment to client best interests and regulatory compliance, which is paramount under Ontario's securities laws. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the declining scores as a temporary anomaly or to implement superficial changes without understanding the underlying issues. This could lead to continued client dissatisfaction and potential regulatory scrutiny for failing to act in the client's best interest, a core principle under Ontario's securities law. Another incorrect approach would be to blame individual advisors without a systemic review. This fails to address potential flaws in the firm's processes or training, which are the responsibility of the firm as a whole under EROC rules. Furthermore, implementing changes that are not clearly communicated to clients or that alter the disclosure requirements without proper adherence to OSC guidelines would be a significant regulatory failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory adherence. This involves actively monitoring performance indicators, conducting root cause analyses when issues arise, consulting relevant regulatory guidance, and implementing solutions that are both effective and compliant. Transparency with clients and regulators, coupled with a commitment to continuous improvement, forms the foundation of sound professional practice. Question 18. The performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores related to the onboarding process for new clients at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliant response to address this trend? Option A. Advise all client-facing staff to simply be more friendly and attentive during the onboarding process, assuming the decline is due to minor interpersonal issues. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive, documented review of the client onboarding process, analyzing client feedback, internal workflows, and advisor training to identify specific areas of dissatisfaction and implement targeted, compliant improvements. Option C. Focus solely on individual advisor performance reviews, attributing the decline in satisfaction to isolated incidents rather than systemic issues. Option D. Implement a new, generic client welcome package without investigating the specific reasons for the declining satisfaction scores. Correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive, documented review of the client onboarding process, analyzing client feedback, internal workflows, and advisor training to identify specific areas of dissatisfaction and implement targeted, compliant improvements. Explanation: the performance metrics show a consistent decline in customer satisfaction scores related to the onboarding process for new clients at a financial advisory firm in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts client retention and the firm's reputation, requiring a proactive and compliant response. The firm must address the root cause of dissatisfaction while adhering to the regulatory framework governing financial advisors in Ontario, specifically the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) rules and National Instrument 31-103 registration requirements, exemptions, and ongoing registrant obligations. The best approach involves a thorough, documented review of the onboarding process, identifying specific pain points contributing to client dissatisfaction, and implementing targeted compliance solutions. This includes analyzing client feedback, internal process flows, and advisor training materials. Any proposed changes must align with the OSC's expectations for client care, suitability, and fair dealing. This systematic review ensures that the firm not only addresses the immediate issue, but also strengthens its compliance framework and client service delivery in a manner that is transparent and defensible to regulators. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the declining scores as temporary fluctuations without investigation. This fails to meet the ethical obligation of acting in the client's best interest and the regulatory requirement under NI 31-103 to have appropriate policies and procedures in place to supervise registered individuals and ensure compliance. Another incorrect approach is to implement superficial changes, such as a new client welcome email, without understanding the underlying issues. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to address the substantive reasons for client dissatisfaction, potentially leading to continued noncompliance with the duty to provide suitable advice and fair treatment. Finally, blaming individual advisors without a systemic review ignores the possibility of flawed processes or inadequate training, which is a failure of supervisory responsibility and a potential breach of regulatory obligations to ensure proper oversight. Professionals should employ a structured problem-solving framework. This begins with acknowledging and validating the performance data. Next, a root cause analysis should be conducted, gathering both quantitative and qualitative data. Based on the findings, potential solutions should be developed, with a strong emphasis on regulatory compliance and client best interests. These solutions should then be implemented with clear communication and training, followed by ongoing monitoring and evaluation to ensure effectiveness and continued compliance. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a client in Ontario is experiencing an unexpected financial emergency and urgently needs to access funds from their registered investment account. As a licensed financial advisor in Ontario, what is the most appropriate initial step to take when presented with this situation? Option A. Immediately process the client's withdrawal request to address their urgent financial need, assuming the client understands the potential consequences. Option B. Inform the client that early withdrawal from registered accounts is generally not permitted and suggest they seek alternative personal financing options. Option C. Review the specific Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations governing early withdrawals from registered accounts, identify any permissible exceptions or conditions, and then discuss these with the client along with potential tax implications and penalties. Option D. Advise the client to structure the withdrawal as a personal loan from the account to avoid regulatory scrutiny and associated penalties. The correct answer is C. Review the specific Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations governing early withdrawals from registered accounts, identify any permissible exceptions or conditions, and then discuss these with the client along with potential tax implications and penalties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a client with the long-term regulatory obligations and ethical duties of a financial advisor. The advisor must navigate the client's desire for quick access to funds against the potential for significant penalties and reputational damage if regulatory requirements are not met. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without alienating the client or compromising the integrity of the financial advice provided. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the relevant Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations pertaining to early withdrawals from registered accounts, specifically focusing on the conditions and documentation required for such transactions. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and client protection by ensuring all legal avenues are explored and followed. It involves clearly communicating to the client the specific OSC rules, potential tax implications, and any penalties associated with early withdrawal, while also exploring alternative solutions that might meet their immediate needs without violating regulations. This aligns with the OSC's mandate to protect investors and maintain fair and efficient capital markets. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately processing the withdrawal request without verifying the specific conditions for early access under OSC rules. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty of care and regulatory obligation to ensure all transactions are compliant, potentially exposing both the client and the advisor to penalties. Another incorrect approach is to advise the client that early withdrawal is impossible without first investigating all permissible exceptions or alternative strategies allowed under OSC regulations. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and may unnecessarily restrict the client's options, potentially leading to a breach of the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest. A further incorrect approach is to suggest the client circumvent OSC regulations by structuring the withdrawal in a way that appears to be a loan or a different type of transaction. This is unethical and illegal, as it constitutes a deliberate attempt to evade regulatory oversight and could lead to severe disciplinary actions, fines, and loss of license. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach when faced with client requests that may have regulatory implications. This involves 1. Understanding the client's objective and the underlying need. 2. Identifying all relevant regulatory frameworks, in this case, OSC regulations for Ontario. 3. Researching specific rules and exceptions related to the client's request. 4. Communicating clearly and transparently with the client about legal requirements, implications, and available options. 5. Documenting all advice and actions taken. 6. Seeking guidance from compliance departments or legal counsel when uncertainty exists. Question 20. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent, albeit minor, deviation of 0.5% in the speed measuring component of a vehicle testing machine used for Class G drivers licensed practical tests in Ontario. This deviation has been present for the last 50 tests conducted. The MTO's regulations specify a maximum allowable deviation of 0.2%. If the machine is used for 100 tests per week, and each test takes 30 minutes, what is the total cumulative potential speed error in kilometers per hour over a 4-week period if the average tested speed was 60 km/h, and how does this impact regulatory compliance? Option A. The total cumulative potential speed error is 14.4 km over 4 weeks. While a deviation, it is within acceptable operational margins for routine testing under Ontario's MTO guidelines. Option B. The total cumulative potential speed error is 57.6 km over 4 weeks. This error is acceptable as the machine is still functioning, and the MTO allows for minor discrepancies in real-world driving conditions. Option C. The total cumulative potential speed error is 28.8 km over 4 weeks. This is a significant deviation from the MTO's 0.2% tolerance, necessitating immediate cessation of use and recalibration to ensure compliance with Ontario's driver testing standards. Option D. The total cumulative potential speed error is 7.2 km over 4 weeks. This minor error does not warrant immediate action as it falls within the acceptable range for practical driver testing in Ontario. The correct answer is C. The total cumulative potential speed error is 28.8 km over 4 weeks. This is a significant deviation from the MTO's 0.2% tolerance, necessitating immediate cessation of use and recalibration to ensure compliance with Ontario's driver testing standards. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of regulatory requirements concerning the accuracy of driver testing equipment. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate action to ensure the integrity of the testing process and public safety, while also adhering to specific provincial regulations. The driver's license is a critical document, and its issuance must be based on reliable and verifiable testing. The correct approach involves immediately halting the use of the suspect equipment and initiating a calibration and verification process according to the standards set by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, MTO. This ensures that all subsequent tests are conducted with equipment that meets the required accuracy specifications. The MTO mandates that all testing equipment used for driver licensing must be regularly calibrated and maintained to ensure its accuracy and reliability. Failure to do so can lead to the issuance of licenses to individuals who may not meet the required driving standards, posing a risk to public safety. This proactive measure upholds the regulatory framework designed to ensure competent drivers are licensed. An incorrect approach would be to continue using the equipment while awaiting a full diagnostic, assuming the slight deviation is negligible. This disregards the MTO's strict accuracy requirements and the potential for cumulative errors to affect test results. It also fails to address the immediate risk to public safety by potentially allowing unqualified individuals to pass their tests. Another incorrect approach would be to recalibrate the equipment without documenting the initial deviation and the steps taken for verification. This lack of proper documentation can hinder future audits and investigations, making it difficult to ascertain the extent of the issue and the effectiveness of the corrective actions. Regulatory bodies often require detailed records of equipment maintenance and calibration. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the manufacturer's warranty for resolution without immediate internal verification and corrective action. While manufacturer support is important, the responsibility for ensuring the accuracy of testing equipment at the point of use rests with the testing facility and its operators, as per MTO guidelines. Delaying action until the manufacturer intervenes could prolong the period of noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Immediate identification and isolation of potential noncompliance. 2. Prompt implementation of corrective actions as dictated by regulatory standards. 3. Thorough documentation of all actions taken. And 4. Escalation to relevant authorities or manufacturers as necessary.